Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2019 Antonija Prelec Memorial Lecture. I am Bruce Demple, a professor in the School of Medicine and the chair of the Antonija Prelec Memorial Committee. So before we get into today's lecture, I would like to say a few words about Antonija Prelec and the fund that sponsors this event. Toni, as her family and friends knew her, was born and educated in Croatia, earning an undergraduate degree in physics and mathematics and a master's degree in library science. In the mid-1960s, she married a physicist, Krsto Prelec, and in the mid-60s, they moved with their two sons to the U.S. to work at Princeton University. There, Toni worked at the Library of Mathematics and Physics, and in the early 1970s, they moved again, this time to Stony Brook. She worked initially at the Melville Library on the West Campus, and in 1974, she accepted the challenge of building the collections of the then new Health Sciences Library. Toni took to this task with zeal and productivity. By all accounts, she was very effective in addressing the needs of the growing School of Medicine, bringing a very personal touch and working with the faculty to build the collections. Toni also pioneered the use of new technologies in the library and for its users, aware of the importance of bringing new tools to the enterprise. Though I did not myself have the privilege of meeting her, I have also heard that she was an excellent cook and that the Prelecs loved to entertain at their home. Toni passed away prematurely and unexpectedly in 1999, and in recognition of her service and her qualities as a librarian and a person, the Antonija Prelec Memorial Fund was established in 2001. In addition to hosting an annual Antonija Prelec Visiting Scholar at Stony Brook, the fund also supports opportunities that further the training and development of health sciences librarians. I'm also very happy to say that her son Drazen and his wife Danica are able to join us today. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague from the Prelec Committee, Jamie Saragosse, who is the head of the Health Sciences Library.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'd like to extend a thank you on behalf of the Prelec Committee to Kate Flewelling and the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, Middle Atlantic Region, for supporting our event and for bringing together our regional partners for a great conversation this afternoon. I would also like to thank the university libraries for their support, including the Interim Dean of Libraries, Shafiq Fazal, and of course, our very special health sciences librarians, without who their hard work would not have gotten to this point today. So thank you to Michael Wong, Greg Stevens, Laurel Scheinfeld, and Jessica Koos. We are very fortunate to have the director of the National Library of Medicine as our speaker today. But as we look forward to today's lecture, we would be remiss if we did not take a moment to reflect on Dr. Brennan's predecessor and previous Prelec lecturer, Dr. Donald Lindbergh. Dr. Lindbergh passed away last month, and immediately upon hearing this news, it became very important to the committee that we acknowledge his contributions. Over a decade ago, Dr. Lindbergh delivered a talk titled "The Use and Abuse of Digital Medical Information, a Public Policy Dilemma." And it amazed us at how relevant that talk would be if he gave it here today. His recommendations for speakers over the years and continued support of the lectureship were very much appreciated. And while I never had the pleasure of meeting Antonija, I've heard many stories from her friends and family about how forward-thinking she was. It was very important to Toni that everyone kept up on their technology skills. She would often recommend or support conference attendance for her colleagues. Antonija Prelec, Dr. Lindbergh, and Dr. Brennan alike work hard towards advancing technology in support of health sciences information. They understand the crucial role of medical librarians in furthering the mission of the National Library of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Brennan's lecture today, Accelerating AI, a New Role for the National Library of Medicine, will be sure to carry on the themes and traditions of our past lecturers and of Antonija herself. Dr. Brennan has been director of the National Library of Medicine since 2016, and one of her greatest contributions has been positioning the NLM as a hub for data science. She sees the importance of medical librarianship in this new era of data-driven health information and discovery. Dr. Brennan holds her master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD in industrial engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Before taking on the dual role as director of the NLM and associate director for data science for the National Institutes of Health and Human Services, Dr. Brennan held academic positions at Marquette University, Case Western, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Brennan has presented and published extensively on various topics related to the field of informatics, including the use of and access to consumer health information, and understanding how technology affects both the clinician and the patient. The awards for her work in this area are numerous, including the Leadership Award by the American Medical Informatics Association and the Virginia K. Saba Nursing Informatics Leadership Award. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our 2019 Antonija Prelec Memorial Lecturer, Dr. Patricia Flatley Brennan.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much to the committee. Thank you to Bruce and Jamie for making me feel so welcome. As I prepared for this event, I looked at this picture often and I realized I had to dress well because this is a lady who dressed well. I can't introduce you to Antonija. I'm hoping to learn more about her through her family and her colleagues today. I can introduce you to my predecessor, Donald A. Lindbergh. So I ask you to join with me for just a few moments to watch a brief video. For those of you who never met Don, you'll find he was quite a character.
I, Donald Lindbergh,
do solemnly swear
that
I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
It seems clear that the trend toward increasing specialization is not likely to change. This means, of course, that the need for information systems that span disciplines and that integrate and evaluate knowledge will be ever more necessary. The truly thrilling progress in such fields as cancer research and molecular biology will be to the average citizen not an idle curiosity or a newspaper headline, but a matter of immediate personal concern. For the practitioner of medicine, the book or journal on the shelf will become increasingly too remote for immediate patient care decisions, and the computer-based personal information station will become increasingly useful, comforting, perhaps essential. Computer and information science will increasingly become a major field of study. In medicine, lagging as usual, humbly behind, medical informatics will emerge as a formal research field and academic discipline. The poet Alexander Pope said very well in 1700, "Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man." Now, to the extent that investigation of man's cognition, learning, and decision-making that is, its information processing skills, can lead to better representation, storage, and retrieval of knowledge in medicine, then these studies must be an essential activity of the National Library of Medicine during the coming decades.
Thank you for taking that time with me. It's astounding how words of 35 years ago still guide us today, and the vision of a man from 35 years ago still brings forward that which we need to reach the public, the scientists, and society as a whole. If you'll pardon me for just a moment, I will get my slideshow moving and we'll have some conversation. The National Library of Medicine is 179 years old. We are approaching our third century. And I'm going to begin and end my talk by telling you it's not your mother's library anymore. We are the information engine for the health of the future. Today I'm going to do three things. I'm going to relate how I'm trying to position the National Library of Medicine for a future that is increasingly data-driven and that data is being exploited very rapidly by artificial intelligence strategies. I'm going to describe 5 efforts at the National Library of Medicine that are trying to accelerate the application and use of AI for the good purposes of society. I'm going to identify a couple challenges that I'm going to leave you as a homework assignment to finish, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions and conversation. But I want to remind you that the National Library of Medicine is best known to the world through its products. We are the face of the NIH. We bring forward information into the hands of millions of people every day. PubMed, PubChem, MEDLINE+, ClinicalTrials.gov. These are tools that professionals use all the time. Wiser you may be less familiar with, but this is a smartphone-based device that helps first responders during toxic spills understand how to best assess what's going on and take action with people. GUDID, good IDs, is a strategy we use to make sure devices know who they are as they send information to the electronic health record. dbGaP, our massive genomic databases, are amazing, but equally amazing is the Visible Human Project that Dr. Lindbergh started in 1990. And still to this day, 3 or 4 times a week is downloaded so that anatomically correct images can be used for teaching and for training. But the library, even though it has vast and fabulous stores of information and amazing data banks, will be nothing if we cannot exploit that data for the future. So I have another brief video for you to watch to see where I think we're going with artificial intelligence and the way NLM can accelerate it. Now, there may be some skeptics out there in the audience who wonder, really, is this another impending winter of AI coming at us? Have we overpromised already? And I will tell you, everything that was in that video is going on right now. We are using emerging technologies with more powerful computers than we had in the 80s, with better data banks to actually improve science and society. Now, everyone brings their own definition to artificial intelligence. I'm going to advance to you that a very simple line, the ability of a computer to act, parentheses, as if human. And in that short phrase, what I'm bringing to you are the 2 major dominant perspectives of what is artificial intelligence. Either it acts as if it's human, or it acts human. If it acts human, it's using the same reasoning that a human uses. I don't believe that for a moment, frankly. If it acts as if human, it results in the same choices, the same endpoints, the same recommendations that a human might act, but they might get there on a separate passage. Now, this is going to become important later on when we talk about what are some of the challenges? Because we're hearing a lot about explainable AI right now and transparencies. And frankly, some of the ways results come out of AI machinations are never going to be interpretable by a human. We could overlay some logic on them, but it's not going to be interpretable. That debate will come back to get us. Common tools you've experienced before: machine learning, natural language processing, neural networks, and deep learning. And frankly, with the exception of the deep learning, a lot of these existed before we got fascinated by artificial intelligence. Natural language processing has been around for a while. Neural networks, not necessarily convolutional neural networks or recurrent neural networks, but neural networks have been around since the late 80s, early 90s. Machine learning has been around. But what's different now is the ability to process more rapidly and the ability to access and acquire and use data more effectively. So what does the National Library of Medicine do to accelerate artificial intelligence in healthcare? Well, first I want to tell you that we've decided it's a good thing to do this. We've decided that by our work, by our partnerships, by our impact on the federal government and on NIH, we are going to be an engine that makes sure AI tools become useful for healthcare. As part of our strategic plan for the next decade, we've made a commitment to accelerate discovery and advance health through data-driven research, to reach more people in more ways, to enhance dissemination and engagement, and to build a workforce for data-driven research in healthcare. These are the responsibilities of the National Library of Medicine. These will address a very broad perspective, a broad portfolio of activities, one part of which is ensuring that we can accelerate artificial intelligence for use in healthcare. So what does the National Library of Medicine do to accelerate AI in healthcare? We do 5 key things. First, we enhance information delivery by creating the 21st century collection. Second, we promote access to research resources and data. Third, we advance the science of clinical trials to prepare for AI because humanly valuable artificial intelligence requires engagement of humans in experimentation. We support and conduct research both in our intramural program and our extramural program, and we prepare people to participate in data-driven science. So let's begin with, what does the 21st century collection look like? From the National Library of Medicine's perspective, we have 3 key roles in creating the 21st century collection. We will be custodians of some of the literature, data repositories, models, and resources for the future. The custodial responsibility at the National Library of Medicine has existed forever. As we think of libraries in the United States, we often think of buildings that hold things. So the idea of being trusted custodians of important artifacts of knowledge will continue as our role. But increasingly, we are connectors to things. We don't buy paper journals anymore. We used to buy 30,000 books a year. We buy about 6,000 books a year now. We don't hold everything, but we connect to many things. And when the National Library of Medicine connects, we promise to preserve safe, secure, and persistent pathways to the literature, to data, to other resources, so that our commitment now becomes the commitment of a pipeline. But that assumes that we know where to connect to, and a good deal of our work today is focused on connecting to things that we know about now. But shortly, and frankly, last year, we need to be able to discover on the fly a new preprint that's just come out, a new data set that's just been released, a new set of observations or environmental sensors that may inform what your work is. We need to build tools of discovery that make sure we can get to where you need to be to enable the discoveries that we will be facing and using in our future. In the center of the lower part of this slide, you see an orb, what we call our sphere of discovery. We'll come back to that. Don't worry about meeting all the words right now. But basically, understand that the sweet spot of the National Library of Medicine is to identify key resources and build interconnections between them, and increasingly to do that using AI techniques. Now, we're using AI techniques to improve some of our existing resources. So I'm going to have you walk with me a little bit through our most familiar resource to the scientific community, PubMed.gov. PubMed.gov is a citation database. It has over 3 million citations in it now. We add 1 million citations a year, by the way. About 3 million unique users every day launch 3 million searches every day. While we're sitting here, these searches are going on. There are 9 million page views. We are, what they say, mission critical. Even when the federal government shuts down, we don't. We can't. People need us, institutions need us, libraries need us, hospitals need us. So we are a persistent resource. But we need to make sure that this resource is available. 30 million articles, 1 million new articles a year. In the 10 or 15 minutes I've been speaking, we've already added 40 new articles. You are all behind already. And you're going to keep getting behind if we don't help you. So we want to take advantage of machine learning and AI approaches to improve PubMed. We want to improve the search quality to help users find the most relevant and high-quality information that's available, and to improve usability to make sure users have good experience with the literature. Now, we know now and in the near future, let's say 3 to 5 years, we will continue to process the literature through the eyeballs of scientists, scholars, and students. In the future, I envision all sorts of ways to present information to people, maybe through sound, maybe through action, maybe through video. But right now we know reading is fundamental, as they say. But 3 million articles a day, 3 million articles available, 1 million articles a day, 2 per minute. This tsunami of information is drowning us. And I got to tell you, it's bad news for those of you who are researchers in here. More than 80% of the time when an individual comes to do a search at PubMed, they only look at the first page. And they only click on what's on the first page. Over half of the PubMed inquiries that are presented return more than one page. And if your research is on page 3 or page 7 or page 40, you're dead. And importantly, if the piece you need to round out your argument in a research grant or better understand a patient care problem is on page 12, you're really in trouble. So we need to get that to you faster and in a more effective way. So our team has built a strategy enhancing information delivery by something called the best match algorithm. The best match algorithm is a strategy that returns a different set of references in a different order. Traditionally, when we do a PubMed search, you get a reverse chronological order. You've all seen that, the most recent paper first. In the future, actually very much in today, when you use our relevance-based research algorithm, you get research papers, you get citations that are returned to you based on a machine learning algorithm that's built a corpus of rules that allows us to return to an exploded PubMed search term that you've entered, a set of references that are more relevant, that are ranked by their relevance to what you're asking about, not necessarily in reverse chronological order. So we optimize the relevance of the search first, and we learn each time a search is done how to make the next search for the next person better. Many of our key ranking factors won't surprise you, article type or publication date, but past usage, how often has this article been used, and query document relatedness, which is a function that we have that looks across our data repository and matches it with our queries to see how often things have been matched together. We know that the best match algorithm produces better PubMed results. Here you see the interface for our new PubMed, which will be deployed by December the 1st of this year. The best match for the phrase influenza vaccine effectiveness are highlighted at the top of this screen. Here we see a citation that comes from 2015, then 2017, then again in 2017, because the content now matches what the query is asking for, not simply the citation. We also are preparing a strategy that will allow our familiar users who want to continue to look at the most recent, that is reverse chronological search, to get that directly to that search. But we know the best match algorithm may serve more users. We also know that sometimes you come specifically to look for an article. When you type 5, 6, or 7 words in, you're probably looking for a known item, a specific item. You don't want this search. Our explosion algorithm, our way of formatting the PubMed search query, now first recognizes and will present back to you, are you looking for an article, instead of bothering you with additional resource. In addition, if you're looking for a citation to a specific person. We do make that constraint. We do make that organized. But relevance-based ranking appears to be delivering much better results to people. We get a much higher click-through rate. People are actually looking at the citations we provide. We've had a 60% increase in the users' access to this over the last year and a half. And we have heard very, very positive regard from individuals, from leadership at the NIH to graduate students. You can look at PubMed Labs today. If you just Google PubMed Labs, you'll be able to test out this relevance-based ranking. And there's a spot for you to give us feedback. It's not for us to tell you how good your searching is, but it's for you to tell us how good the interface is. Please let us know how it's working. One of the things we've added is that in alignment with the idea of explainable AI is something called Snippets. So if you look at the box under the citation now, you'll see there's a brief description of the article, and highlighted in the article, this is actual sentences, phrases extracted from the article, highlighted in that article are matching phrases to your search string. So you can see as you're looking through your citation list now, a beginning glimpse of what's in the article. This we believe will make the user experience better, will allow an individual to know more quickly, am I getting to what I need to be getting from this? You may also notice on the left-hand side a vertical histogram. This allows you to interact with this, to restrict the range of your search by years, so that you can get a sense of how many papers have appeared over the period of time, and this is from 1997 to 2018. But if you only want the last 2 years of papers, you can just shift the slider bar over and get a restricted search for just the last 2 years of paper. Some of our filters are listed up here. Do you want journals? Do you want only journals with full text, or just the abstracts? And what type of article do you want? Review articles or systematic reviews, clinical trials? So we're trying to help the user get more quickly to what he or she is looking to get to. In addition to improving PubMed Match by the searching by relevance, we're also building additional tools to for example, identify related articles in a more efficient fashion, or to explode the query through semantic query understanding, to do a natural language processing approach to better understanding what an individual needs. Over the next year, you can expect to see a new release of PubMed as we move from PubMed Labs to PubMed 2.0, but we'll also be expanding our work in semantic indexing and searching, and in deep learning techniques that help us to better understand how individuals are exploring the literature. On the horizon, I hope, will be search strategies that allow us to better respond to the needs of teams, not just individuals. Right now, we assume that one person is looking at our results for one individual's work. We need to recognize how team science can be supported. So PubMed, our massive citation database, we hope to be delivering you information in a way that makes it more relevant to you, and we're accelerating the use of accelerating the use of our literature by applying AI techniques. Now, I'm going to turn to PubMed Central for a few minutes and talk a little bit about public access and open science. PubMed Central is a full-text literature repository. That is, the full text of articles are available. There are over 5 million articles now available in PubMed Central, all of which have a citation within PubMed. What's unique about what's available in PubMed Central is that its full text is available to anyone who wants to review the article. Sometimes we have full participation journals that put all of their volumes and issues into the PubMed Central. Sometimes it's an article-by-article deposit. But we recognize and we know that this allows individuals to not simply get the abstract and then be bombarded with be stopped by a paywall, but actually get directly to the article itself. This is quite consistent with both the federal government's drive towards public access and the philosophy that's spreading across science about open science, making the results of research made possible by the funding of the country available to the country as quickly as possible. We've noticed over the last 10 years of our public access activity that we have seen an increase in the use both of the deposits of NIH-funded articles, now well over 1 million NIH-funded articles, and the growth of our total article database. This PubMed Central article is becoming the cornerstone around which we're building a series of open science tools. Now, open science enables sharing, and allows the interim products of research, parts of the research process, to be accessed and used by others. Using the PubMed Central article, we now have the ability to attach supplementary files that can attach data in support of the findings of a particular article, can attach executable computational models, preprints that may have originated before the article was published, and connections to other literature. So we're viewing not simply an article by itself, but the interconnectedness of that article to other pieces of information. In the future, we expect to be able to also link other aspects of the research process, including standards that will allow for better dimensions of nomenclature and metadata, the tools, codes, and workflows that have been used in other research projects to allow them to be repurposed. So while we remain deeply committed to our responsibilities to make sure the literature is available and accessible in a timely and efficient fashion, we are committed to making sure that the literature is the launching point to other aspects of the scientific process. As part of the launching point, we are promoting access to research and to research data and research resources. I pointed out our sphere of discovery earlier to you. I want you to look at it a little more closely now. In general, up until the late 90s, early 2000s, a research project began with a hypothesis. Data were collected, the hypothesis was resolved, the results were published, and that was the end of the story. But increasingly, we've realized the value in the data that may be reused for other studies, in understanding more about the instruments that were used, or being able to replicate the protocols, or actually understand the basic code. The National Library of Medicine is committed to making this ecosphere of discovery the library of the future. We want to support the interconnectedness, whether we serve as the custodian of the information, the connector to the information, or the discoverer of the information. And increasingly, we realize that we have an expanded type of health data. While we're familiar with genomics and we have significant experience with genomic data at the National Center for Biotechnology Information, we recognize the increasing importance of clinical information, of images and sensor data, and then the entire set of what we consider the emerging data repositories and data resources of the healthcare system: claims data, disease registry, wearables, and social media, sensors that may be around an individual. We recognize that the ability to understand health phenomena in context requires that we engage with large amounts of data. In order to be able to engage well with this data, we are committed to making data fair. This term may be familiar to some of you. It is a commitment advanced across the world that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It's not a small task. It's frankly quite a large task to be able to discover data and find pathways to get that, which requires that we ensure access control. Interoperable, making sure the data have terms and metadata connected to them that allows for connection, and reusable, making sure data is available, accessible, and open to individuals. In order to find research data, the literature has often been a starting point. And in many articles, you see data availability statements, several of which are up here on the screen. Some of these data availability statements say things such as all relevant data within this paper are in the supplemental files, and the protein structures can be found at another place. But in the lower right-hand side, we see the data generated in the current study can be available from the corresponding author upon request, provided the email still works, provided the person is still available, provided the data is still in a form that can be used. We recognize this is not enough. So we are moving to improve the data access through the literature, recognizing that the most common way individuals access research data still is through articles. In PubMed, which is our citation database, we have two types of resources that improve the access to data. First, we have the secondary source ID. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see the possibility of linking to filters. This is one linking to data set that's available in Figshare. Second, within PubMed, this PubMed citation, we have the link out possibility that links directly to supported materials in the cited references. In the back end, in the background of this, the National Library of Medicine works with publishers, works with public data repositories, works with researchers to make sure these links are available. We don't expect the researcher to fill out every one of these individually. We're trying to build a data ecosystem for this. In PubMed Central, that is our full text database, we append files up to 2 gigabytes. We also use the data citation process. So in this particular case, you see a series of data citations that are being stored in Australia. But also it's possible to append computer code, mathematical or computational models, audio and video clips, oversized tables, but importantly, more detail about the studies, intervention protocols, primary supplementary data sets, expanded methodologies, and additional figures. We recognize that attaching data sets to an article is only an interim step. It's not going to be the final best way to make data findable and shareable. But at this point in time, it gives us a starting point to help investigators begin to get practice with sharing their data. The National Institutes of Health encourages open access data sharing repositories for all data generated by NIH-funded studies, and there will be a new data management and sharing plan proposed and released for public comment in the next few weeks. I hope you'll take a good look at it and let us know how it seems to you and how it will work in your research process. But at the present time, we do encourage our investigators to share their data. We have 3 opportunities for investigators to share the data. First, to share data through the PubMed Central, as I just described, up to about 2 gigabytes. Second, to use public access repository. We have a demonstration project happening with Figshare right now to make NIH data available. These data sets will have unique identifiers and will be accessible in perpetuity. And finally, the NIH has initiated a STRIDES program, a scientific data repository in commercial clouds, where our very high-value data sets will be available and accessible to individuals. In the last 3 months, we've uploaded the entire sequence read archive, the short read archive data set that we developed at the National Center for Biotechnology Information is now fully available, all 12 petabytes replicated in both Google and AWS, so it's available for the public to use. We believe that by making data open and accessible, we will accelerate the development of technologies that will make best use of that data. Those technologies are frequently thought of as models, and I'd like to take just a moment to make a plea for thinking about models as an interim product of research as we make these models available, how the National Library of Medicine proposes to be helpful with this. We see it critically important to develop a set of metadata, of grammar around models to explain the model type, its purposes, the assumptions that were embedded in the building of that model, where its use is perceived to be relevant, and what scale it can be used at. We also envision that declarations of models must include information about model verification and model validation, so that reuse of the model, making models fair, reusing AI models can be done in a way that is trustable. We believe the starting point for this is to create unique IDs for models that are machine readable, freely available to generate and access, but persistent and consistent across journals and publishers. So we're recommending individuals begin to think of model declaration using one of 3 strategies. Research Resource IDs, that's RRID, available through scicrunch.org, the Digital Object Identifier, DOI, or GUID IDs, GUID IDs that we develop at the NIH. So the RRIDs are common, and they may be familiar to those of you who've done work with mouse models or with other animal models, because they've been used emerging in their use for declaring the specifics of a cell line, antibodies, or a specific software. DOIs tend to refer to full objects, whereas RRIDs tend to be applied to component objects. But frequently, we still get data sets and we still get models sent to a supplementary data to PubMed Central without its own ID. So we do assign those to, again, make them tractable, definable, and accessible. In order to make good use of artificial intelligence in the healthcare system for the scientific discovery as well as clinical practice, we believe it's essential to improve the platform for discovery of data and the tractability of models. But in addition to that, we have to improve the quality of the data and the generalizability of the data that we build many of these models on. So I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about clinicaltrials.gov, which is an important operation at the National Library of Medicine that we developed in support of NIH's vision to have clinical trials registered, the results reported in a way that both enhances recruitment and promotes discovery. How many have used a clinicaltrials.gov search to find? So it's familiar to some of you. Many times the search is launched because someone that you know or care about has concerns about a health problem or would like to be in a clinical trial, worried about possibly finding a life-saving technique treatment. Other times we use clinicaltrials.gov to understand what has been done in a particular area. I'm going to use the example of cancer survivorship studies that may be information where a patient may want to find ways to participate in a study, or maybe that scientists want to know what else has been done. The clinical trials interface is depicted on the screen. We have over 300,000 trials already registered in clinicaltrials.gov. Most of these studies are small, less than 1,000 participants. So this is a starting point that allows for integration of studies, findability of studies. As English language term is typed into the search box, other restrictions can be made, all studies, for example, or in what country is this study going on. And a resulting list provides information about study status. You see in the red bar, these are all studies that are recruiting. The center line tells you what the studies are about. The next column over explains what kind of cancer the studies are addressing, and then some information about the interventions and the locations. This is a strategy that both helps patients and family members find trials that might be of use to them, but also helps program officers and scientists understand what other studies may be going on. Now, unfortunately, we know that fully 1/3 of the clinical trials supported by NIH never appear in a publication. This loss to science and society is unconscionable. And guided by the direction from the FDA and the direction from NIH, we now provide within clinicaltrials.gov the ability to have results reporting. Within 1 year of the completion of the study, summary results are available for every clinical trial that is now registered as of January of 17. So here is an example of a study for patients with colorectal cancer. And we've done a specific search on identifying studies that are complete and have results available for them. The study results that are displayed and can be brought down in a machine-readable fashion are, in this case, a human-readable summary of how many people experienced an adverse event and how long, how many days after the study. And so you'll see the two study groups comparing two different types of chemotherapy for cancer and the differences in the two groups, with 353 patients in one group experiencing the adverse event and 295 patients in another group experiencing the event. So we provide access to summary data, accounting and being responsible to society to return information to society. In addition, though, we now have available through clinicaltrials.gov data that can be synthesized and summarized across studies that allow for new kinds of investigations and new kinds of inquiry. Improving the access to clinical trials and their conduct is going to increase our ability to use artificial intelligence techniques in healthcare, because we will have larger, more representative samples from studies. We will also have more complete results of studies. The National Library of Medicine does support and conduct research, and in supporting and conducting research, we do this through our intramural research program at the NIH campus, as well as through our extramural research program around the country. We spend about $100 million a year on research, basic and applied methodological research. That's $100 million out of our about $500 million research budget. I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of the research that we conduct in basic biology, public health, and discovery from data. Work that's being done by Matthew Lundgren's group is applying deep learning techniques to determine the patients who are at risk for pulmonary embolism. The goal is to identify the patient before the pulmonary emboli occurs and conduct an intervention so that their patient is not disabled or does not experience bad outcomes. This project is leveraging real-time EMR clinical data to arrive at a patient-specific imaging outcome prediction that occurs based on a previously trained deep learning model. A different approach to adding that is adding image interpretation is work that's being done by Jian Liu in our intramural research program. Dr. Liu's team is looking at how we can better analyze the images related to patients who are at risk for age-related macular degeneration. Age-related macular degeneration is a leading cause of blindness in people over the age of 50. Having trained a series of images using deep neural network strategies on a set of data collected through the National Eye Institute. The team has developed an algorithm that outperforms the ophthalmologist in detecting which of these fungi indicate the risk for age-related macular degeneration. It does not supplant the clinician diagnosis, but it allows for better identification of people who need more extensive understanding. We're also working at AI applications for disease classification. And here you see a series of cells that are visualized through a smartphone. We saw this in the video. And that is done to detect the presence of and the proliferation of malarial cells in the blood. This is being proposed for in-field assessment of evaluating the impact of malarial treatment. And it has the capability of bringing expertise out into the field with a network model that is trained at the research site and then deployed in a power-preserving way through a smartphone. An in-field determination of whether or not the patient is responding to medications can be made. Another clinical use of image interpretation is deep learning for cervical cancer screening. The idea here is the following. Cervical cancer is a leading cause of mortality among women in low-resource settings, and it has a very simple testing strategy. It's basically washing acetic acid over the cervix and determining how the presence of risk cancer cells. Yet detecting that is interpreting that information is something that is not a skill that every clinician has, and frankly, there are not enough clinicians to do this kind of exam. So again, a machine learning algorithm trained on thousands of images of cervix that separates them into women likely to be at risk for cervical cancer or likely not to be at risk, becomes the cornerstone that then gets applied in an in-field assessment where a smartphone connected to a colposcopy takes an image and has an image interpreted in the moment. The goal is not to replace clinician judgment, but it's to identify the women who may be at risk to bring them into consideration and treatment more quickly. Other work addresses a more common and complex problem across the United States and the world, and that is determining the extent of cardiac disease in sickle cell patients. Often this has required biological and physiologic sampling, but this team that's led by Samir Antani from our intramural program is looking at wave determination during a echocardiogram to determine whether there is a pattern of symptomatology that's related to the sickling phenomenon of the patient. In this way, there is a non-invasive test done to identify the person who's experienced a problem at great risk and possibly complications from the sickle cell disease. Our last attempt at looking at deep learning and interpretation has to do with colorectal cancer screening. And this is done at the University of Texas at Sneed Hudson Porras Group. The goal here is to provide better discrimination of the regions and the features on the whole slide microscopy image for the different types of polyps that are detected. Their team is again trying to improve the diagnosis in the moment of polyps that could appear to be at risk and knowing whether intervention needs to be done during the point of the care of patients while they're having a colonoscopy done as opposed to waiting. Each of the examples I've given to you so far show examples of artificial intelligence used to complement human judgment in a complex image interpretation task. Other work is being done to use artificial intelligence to better sort through grant proposals, making sure they're assigned to the correct reviewers, or to determine how to predict the patient, the clinical phenotype from a series of clinical indicators. Our work at the National Library of Medicine applies techniques to new kinds of data to ensure that AI becomes helpful to the population. But to be helpful to the population, we have to reach into the population. And so I bring to your attention MEDLINE Plus, which is a product of the National Library of Medicine, but is a way that we communicate research and findings to the world to help individuals better understand our findings. And so our fundamental findings are developed, translated into lay-readable information, and then provided through MEDLINE Plus. We have a suite of interconnected tools from clinicaltrials.gov, PubMed Central, MEDLINE Plus that ensures the benefits of accelerating AI for healthcare reach all the way across the population. But we are committed to making sure that we educate the population to participate in data-driven science. I'm going to close by talking to you about 3 activities. First, engaging the next generation in promoting data literacy. We have an external R01 initiative right now called Personal Health Libraries for Consumers and Patients. This is specifically designed to bring tools into the hands of patients so that they are better able to self-manage their information. The goal here is not to replace clinical judgment, but to help the person overwhelmed with lots of pieces of self-monitoring information, maybe clinical guidance, clinical records, come to an understanding of how to manage this. We've seen marvelous success with some very interesting problems, including helping children who are aging out of foster care into independent health living better understand their health histories, not by providing them with a big stack of binders of papers, but by providing them with health profiles that can take them to the future. You may be familiar with the All of Us program. The All of Us program is a national initiative by the NIH to engage 1 million people into a 10-year-long process that will involve assessing their health state, getting some biological and health indicators, and predicting future patterns. The amount of data that we're collecting in the All of Us program is phenomenal, and it is providing a foundation, a basis for using new and developing new artificial intelligence techniques. By the way, if you're interested, you can start to look at some of the All of Us data by looking at the allofus.gov/research, and you'll find the research portal available and open to individuals. You're sensing, I hope, the commitment to open information. Part of the open information from the All of Us program, though, is to return to individuals their genomic profiles, their information about their health, and we know that's complicated for people to understand and to use. So in partnership with the National Network of Libraries of Medicine and led by the University of Pittsburgh and the Mid-Atlantic National Network Coordinating Center, we have an information resource, an educational resource, materials being prepared to make sure that if a patient walks into a public library and asks for assistance, how do I understand my genome, there's information tools available for our public librarians to provide. You see, we have, again, an end-to-end resource that ensures that the discoveries driven by AI can get into the hands of those who may need them. Finally, workforce training at the National Library of Medicine is addressing 4 key areas. We're expanding our focus on data management, on librarians who are skilled with data management, increasing our data science capacity in our workforce both at the NLM and nationally. We've expanded our PhD training to include better methodological focus within our biomedical informatics training. And finally, focus on librarians as informationists because they will be partners in the care and the health delivery and the scientific discovery of the future and need to be brought along as we move into this revolution of thinking about AI-powered health through better data access. I said I would leave you with a homework assignment, and so I'm presenting it to you now. The critical issues that I see in the development and use of artificial intelligence for biomedical discovery are largely non-technical. These are judgment calls that require reflection, interaction, and frankly, a new culture of science. We need to determine what does rigor and reproducibility mean in an AI world where combinations and neural networks have millions of layers of interactions and the tractability becomes impossible. What does it mean to reproduce an algorithm that's highly tailored to one person? Those are conversational social science discussions, not computational discussions. We need to understand how we protect the privacy of patients for investigations that may come in the future that may disclose things about individuals that we never thought were identifiable. The ability to identify an individual by watching the way they walk or their facial expression, now so commonly identified as an AI application, requires that we rethink what does patient privacy actually mean. Ensuring the discoverability of data sets that may be useful requires opening up some things that have once considered proprietary either by institutions or investigators who want to hold on to the data to as long as they can possibly find some use for it, as well as from industry, so we have new partnerships to develop. Data stewardship requires that we think about data preservation in new ways and the sustainability of our repositories. We are growing more rapidly than we can possibly afford. We need to make judicious choices about ensuring data availability and preservation and promoting the level of sharing that is needed. And finally and fundamentally, we need to maintain an era of transparency, of openness, even within a conversation where the full explanation of a methodology cannot be traced by human logic, but rather needs to be expressed and conveyed in new ways and new understandings. The National Library of Medicine remains committed to being a trusted source of information and data, of ensuring that information is available to drive the health of the future, that artificial intelligence techniques are developed in ways that can be made useful for the public, and that fundamentally health is improved by data-driven discovery. I thank you for your attention. You can reach me on my blog weekly, by email, and we have a few minutes for conversation and questions. Thank you very much.
Now, for the questions, please wait for the microphone. If you start before you get it, I'll make you start over. So, who's up?
Thanks. I was interested to see the supplemental data storage on PubMed Central, and I'm wondering if it's correct to think about that as kind of a competitor to something like Figshare. For example, I'm working with an editor now who has this management problem, and he's trying to make a decision as to where to send the data and is sort of defaulting to Figshare. Should I recommend PubMed Central, for example?
So this is a very good question. So we only take very small data sets in PubMed Central, and they have to be, as 2 gigabytes or smaller, and they have to be applied to specific articles. So Figshare allows you to deposit a data set and then connect articles to the data set. We have a very close relationship with Figshare where we automatically scan their repository each night, and if there is a PubMed-related article, either a citation in PubMed or a full-text article, we actually make the connection. What I would say is if the data set is intended to be more generalizably useful, that public repositories like Figshare may be better because the data will be more directly discoverable. If the data are really uniquely in support of the findings of a specific study, deposit in PubMed Central may make more sense. Up front here.
We could talk about AI. Just about AI. Machine learning architecture learning. That is tricky. I read it at Ecosphere Discovery. That is what I could write about AI. That can make artificial intelligence. It can provide a medical purpose for analyzing information. I got it I put my app with human information.
I read somewhere that that some scientists think that AI is not necessarily, doesn't necessarily match a human. It's really just analyze the information in a different way than a human does.
Yes. So there are several schools of thought about what AI actually means. And there might be 100 if we asked everyone in this room. Often AI is the application of a computer using some kind of formal logic or mathematical relations that results in an answer that is similar to what a human would get to, similar to what a human would determine, but doesn't follow the same thinking process that a human follows. Others have wanted AI to actually follow the exact thinking process. So often we see when a clinician says, well, why did you make this recommendation? The clinician wants to see a series of logical terms that match the way the clinician thinks. Sometimes artificial intelligence, especially when we use natural language processing tools, may replicate the exact thought process of a clinician. Other times, though, it may simply replicate the judgment, but get to the judgment in a very different way.
That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. So we got the message. Thank you.
Yes, as a scientist, we are really enthusiastic about sharing positive data. But what about sharing negative data? Because in AI, it is important that negative data is as important as positive data to determine any kind of logic, to make a decision where the science is leading and where the future is basically going on.
So this is a really excellent point. If I'm understanding you correctly, we don't simply want data sets that support a specific hypothesis, but we actually want data sets that may actually not support the specific hypothesis. So I'm going to make 2 points related to this. The first is that when we use public repositories like Figshare or Strides, the NIH repository, all of the data from a study or all of the data from sets of studies can be introduced. And different studies can be linked to that particular data set, but the data set itself is more complete. When we deposit data through PubMed Central in support of a specific article, we often are dealing with publication bias. So we are often dealing with only data that was used in a study that supported a specific hypothesis. Now, we see clinicaltrials.gov is sort of in the middle there, because if 100% of all trial data are reported, then we will have access to the information even when the trial hypothesis was not supported. So this is an important step. Now, right now, clinicaltrials.gov does not have individual participant data. It only carries summary data. And most of the AI analytics don't work on summary data. They need to work on raw data. We envision, and we are building clinicaltrials.gov as a scaffold type model that will, where appropriate protections are in place, allow for direct access to the underlying clinical and individual participant data. So we envision a way that we will be avoiding the publication bias, assuring that larger data sets, more complete data sets are available and are under proper protections accessible to new algorithms. A critical piece here is the privacy protection and preserving. And so one of the other features of clinicaltrials.gov is we are including with each record now, it's required by federal regulation to include the human subjects protection. And we are working with trialists upstream to help them make sure that the clinical trials consent to participate is broad enough so that the participant makes an informed decision about making data available for subsequent studies.
That's also true about even basics. Okay, sorry. But that's also true on basic science data.
Yes.
Because in basic science studies, people also just only publish positive data rather than negative data.
Well,
so is there a way that people access to negative data, because that's also important?
So the genome data sharing policy of the NIH, which was released in 2013, requires that all data generated in the course of genomic studies, human or non-human data, be deposited in public repositories. So the Short Read Archive, the SRA, is one of those public archives where the data are deposited separate from the data interpretation. It has challenges because the SRA is too large for any single machine to be able to scan and evaluate. So in the last 3 months, one of the motivators for moving SRA into a cloud instance is to allow it to be stored in a place where the entire data set can be examined, can be explored at the same time. Now, in order to make that happen, we need new kinds of tools. So when we first began GenBank in the early 80s, there was no BLAST. There was no tool that would allow for sequence evaluation. It took 6 or 7 years of having the data available for scientists to make new tools. We envision that making our data available will actually accelerate the tools that will make it possible to see the data. Right now, SRA is almost exclusively non-human data. There is a small amount of human data in there. The 1,000 Genomes Project is accessible through that. In the future, we will have controlled access human data in our cloud instances also.
Up here, I'm not quite sure I know how to ask this question, but it stems from the fact that when you put in search terms and you get 29,000 hits,
right,
doesn't help. So you focus primarily on the data, but what about the user? For example, if I buy, I don't know, tulip bulbs from Amazon, they'll send me how to get a rake, how to get a shovel, weather reports on the planting seasons and so on. So you're focused on the data, but what about the user? I imagine you learn a lot of things about the kinds of articles I click on, and that information goes nowhere. I mean, I don't think you're looking at that data, are you?
Well, let me explain that we are looking at it in two ways. We always are looking at data, at how people use our system to find out how to make it work better. So the known item search, for example, when we realized that people were putting 6 or 7 words in, they were looking for an article title. So we stopped giving them a concatenation of all those words together, which got the 29,000 citations. For those of you who have created a My NCBI profile, we actually can help you refine your search processes because then by creating that profile, you've actually given us permission to understand how you behave in your sessions. You can do a range of things with My NCBI, from requesting weekly articles to be sent to you in topical areas that you're interested in, to getting a refinement of your own search processes. But we only do that with the permission of an individual. And of the millions of people that use the NCBI resources, the PubMed resources every day, probably I would say less than 5% have actually created a profile that actually allows us to help them better. Now, Dr. Collins, Francis Collins, would like us to say, well, you're interested in this article, and people who read this article also read that article. And that's what our relevance-based ranking system is bringing about. So we know that we don't know who you are, and we don't know who the other readers are, but we do know that someone who's clicked on this article has also clicked on this other article, so we serve that up in a more dynamic way. It is a question and a bit of a trade-off of how much do you want us to know about what you're doing with your search behavior. I believe very strongly in some tenets that come out of library science that say unfettered search, unsupervised, is the right of an individual scientist. And until the scientist gives us permission, or the patient or the clinician, to actually watch their search behavior, we should not be watching it too closely. And then over here, Bruce. Yes. Hi.
I'm more interested in the model sharing part.
Yes, thank you.
I wonder if you can make some comments on, like, aside from ID of the models and the authors, and in general, how do you envision would be the challenge of model sharing? What would be the specific questions that would be really relevant and be useful? And furthermore, it seems to be very difficult to peel the model aside from the problem and data. So yes, how do you see the model sharing can be combined, should be combined, and or should be coupled or decoupled with data sharing and citation network in general?
So our first foray into looking at models as a research data type, as a research product, led me to conversations with SIAM and Informs and some of the more analytic operations research groups to find out how do those communities handle models. And I got 2 responses. I got one part of the SIAM community says models are so specific to the exact data set and the exact community that we'd never share them again. So why bother? And then I also got that could be very interesting. So I believe it's important to declare and share models first and foremost for accountability. You have to expose what you actually did with this process, whatever the process was, whether it's weather patterns or facial recognition. If that leads to sharing, that's useful. But if it doesn't necessarily need to sharing, to still be important to do. So the first question is, the first step is a determination that we're actively involved in right now is whether we should solicit participation of a small community of modelers who actually have the high motivation to share and to help us probe this, or if we should go for a more general approach and provide the general grammar for model. There is an interagency modeling and simulation and analysis group across the federal government, and they're actually leaning towards the latter. They would like to see us stand up a repository beyond GitHub where people could deposit models with some level of declaration and of usefulness. The idea of sharing models directly with data sets we see as actually a somewhat of a different problem. We see it as a connectivity problem rather than a common problem. So I think Dockers and other container approaches where the data and the model are tightly coupled are useful. But I think for general purpose uses, identifying a data set, whether it's in Figshare or Strides or PMC, and the model associated with it and providing linkages between them is the best strategy for us to do now. But there's many, many research questions here, and we're open for research ideas, so bring us your best ideas. Yes?
Hi, thanks for the talk. From a clinician's perspective, a couple of things are variables we have. One is that time.
Yes.
The second is that at our end, the computer should be working because the system, in a way, the Microsoft is not working or whatever the case might be. The other thing is that coming to the Amazon model, which they seem to be pretty good at this best. If you look at the drop down, price low to high, one of the thing is best match. Is it any way that if this particular article is read by hundreds of people, is a way that they can sort of weigh in on their, and we score that, so that suppose I get that score of number, no, this article was not good for the following reason, this and that. Capture that data, that might make me get to the answer I'm looking for.
So we have had many requests to be able to annotate PubMed records with thoughts, with assessments, with uncertainty factors. At the present time, we do not anticipate doing that because of the difficulty in validating the assessment. We ran an initiative for a while called PubMed Commons. Some of you in the room may have used that, which was directly designed to do that. That was, it would append to a PubMed record, not change the record, but append commentary and use, much the same way you can put commentary on preprints. We did not get much use of that, frankly, so I don't envisage that going forward. I was asked earlier today about putting in some quantification of uncertainty and confidence around some of the information in our papers to be able to make them more useful to systematic reviews and guidelines development. And I think that what I see that being is really a derived product from our resources, not something that we'll do. In general, the federal perspective is the following, that we should provide the data and that those services that can be built on top of the data should drive things like that. So making PubMed available through an API would allow for something like that to be done.
And the other small question is, in the clinical office, is there anywhere where you can use voice as the way to quickly get, and using the algorithm you created. So,
yes.
Because you see medical studies, they include and exclude populations which as perfect to get a good outcome.
Right.
Whereas as clinicians, the guy is diabetic, hypertensive, he's got infected, and I want to give this drug. So there may be a researcher somewhere who might have, so I want to get to that article and what did he do, which was not available in the original person who made the drug.
We have been experimenting with voice interface to PubMed. Now that there's improvements, frankly, in the application of AI to translation of human speech to text, we anticipate that there may be growth in this particular area. Again, it's more as a federal repository, our responsibility is to get the articles in the basic and most trustable shape they can be in and have these tools built on top of them. We are very interested, though, in the kind of tools that would make things make our tools most useful to individuals. Given the constraints on federal funding, we really are investing in the data quality over the interface quality, but we are trying to improve the interface some. Any dbGaP users in the room, I have to apologize to you. I know that interface is bad, but we're working to get that better also. But the challenge is, if we're going to make a federal investment, we really believe that we should be in the integrity of the data and the interface design. Really, we want to partner, and we do some partner with Google and with Amazon to improve our interface design pushed out through them.
Okay, for two more?
Okay, sure, if that's all right. And I see one up and one down, so maybe afterwards if we don't get to all of them.
To what extent now, and also maybe project 5 years from now, or is the NLM searching and handling the literature in Asian language? And I don't mean just the ones with the English abstract.
No, you mean in the base language.
Right,
yes.
And also whatever you're doing with that now, tell me where you think you'll be 5 years from now, because certainly China is going to certainly have some major things that we ought to be able to read them right away.
Yes. So we have literature in over 30 different languages right now, but in order to be a journal that is considered a MEDLINE journal, you must have an English language abstract. So where we are right now is we will index the literature in other languages, including three dialects in Chinese, but it must have an English language an English language abstract to be included. Where will we be in the future? This is something that is a little bit akin to the question about spoken interface. We've tried with the technological communities, including some of the big giants like Google, have tried automatic translation in the moment so that text written in any language can be transferred to other language. It doesn't work well yet. This is a really intractable AI problem. One of the best examples I've seen is "the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak," translated by an AI system into Russian says "the vodka is good, but the meat is rotten." So, we want to avoid those kinds of translations. And it's not just Chinese English, although the knowledge of the community, the Chinese community, is critical for the world. But it's also translating scientific language into lay language, because we do know that of the millions of people that use our resources every day, about half of them are lay people. And maybe it's a science project, or maybe it's a worried mom, but we have to get our articles are largely written for a scientifically literate English-speaking audience, Western educated, to be quite honest. So we do recognize the need to open, and I think that we will be doing that through partnerships. I'm very, very interested in the patient libraries. If people have ideas about how we can better make our literature accessible to, in my case, it's to consumers. But I will take back the question about where I see our future with China. We do know that disease doesn't recognize borders, and we also know that the way we characterize illnesses is highly enculturated. So part of this, it requires not simply transliteral translation, but also if you will, the contextual translation of how illness is experienced, expectations of therapeutics, what an individual anticipates a future lifespan to be. So we have a number of pieces with that. Very good question, thank you.
Hi. In a previous answer, you mentioned a potential model sharing system,
yes,
service. Is that concrete? Could you speak more about that? And in the meantime, would you recommend any alternatives?
So the only platform we have for model sharing right now is through the PubMed Central articles, where the model can be attached to the algorithm or the code itself. I misspoke earlier where I said executables. We do not store executables. We do not store utilities that can be launched from inside of PubMed. You can take the code out. PubMed Central. I'm working with two groups at Yale and at University of Kentucky who both have had centers for models, and they would actually like to see repositories of models held by modeling experts, because then they are willing to do the curation as the model comes in. And curating models is really very different than curating data or curating text, because it isn't so much does this make logical sense, but can it work the way they say it works? And so I think what we may see in the short run is some trials with different communities to store the models with expert curation at the local site, rather than standing up a federal repository first.
So, Patty, one short bonus question.
Okay, and I know this gentleman over here has got a question. Well, I'll talk to you right afterwards, okay?
All right. Thank you for sharing those AI initiatives at NLM. So my question is, you're talking about to linking out from the PubMed to the other resources. So I was wondering whether how that link out is decided, because most publishers will only link out to their own publications. And so question like how you will maintain or know those links will work well, not broken, and those kind of things, whether has to be considered in your model when you think about the whole algorithm.
This is a very complicated question, and I'll try to answer it as succinctly as I can. Many of you may have seen a paper in Nature a couple weeks ago about the failure of supplemental data. That is, the links get broken, they're not easy to maintain, or the content can no longer be read. Anything that was on a floppy disk 5 years ago can't be read now. I'm not sure we're going to be able to read Excel files in 10 years from now. We can't read Lotus 123 anymore. So it's possible that this process of ensuring access and accessibility is going to be very important. When we hold the data, when we are custodians of the data, we actually have a very complex process of refreshing, whether it's refreshing because of middleware or refreshing because of a change in operating system or file structure. Every time we make a major refresh, we actually go back and repropagate. where we connect to data, and this is particularly for data repositories that are in an international sphere. The International Nucleotide Sequence is one of the important ones. EMBI, the European collection, is another. We persistently test and check those links throughout the time. Now, you asked about how we decide who we connect to. And we recognize the rights of publishers to be very circumspect with who they connect to. And that's why some of you have asked me about why do we have two buttons for the PubMed Central article and the publisher's article. And couldn't we make the publisher's article link bigger or smaller? We get questions about that a lot. Our linkages are first and foremost made in terms of the content of the articles. That is, articles that have similar themes get linked in our database, independent of who publishes the article. The same with data sets. We may label a data set with a human indexer's determination of what the data means in a way that's slightly different than the originator of the data. We do recognize that the kind of linkages that are made within publishers' websites tend to be to their own information, whereas we think as a federal repository, we must make those linkages as broad as possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Patty. This was a terrific presentation
Thank you.
and an outstanding discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for the comments.